At the most exclusive corporate gala of the year, Kara Whitmore, the youngest CEO in the company's history, leaned close to the black man standing alone by the bar and whispered, "My age isn't a problem, right?" He was a single father, a mid-level employee, dressed in a simple suit that cost less than her earrings. She was younger, wealthier, and had everything he didn't. She thought she was facing a man intimidated by their gap in status. But seconds later, his response made the smile on her lips freeze completely. What could make a CEO lose control of her own emotions? Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss stories like this one. Now let's get back to Kara and the man who was about to change everything she believed about power and love. The annual networking gala was held on the 50th floor of the Whitmore Industries Tower, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering Manhattan skyline. Champagne flowed freely, and conversations hummed with the careful calculation of people who measured words like currency. Kara Whitmore moved through the crowd like a queen surveying her kingdom. At 32, she had become the youngest CEO in the company's history, inheriting a portion of the empire from her family, but proving her worth through sheer determination. Tonight, she wore a black designer gown that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and every eye in the room followed her. But Kara was tired. Tired of the same flattering smiles, the same rehearsed compliments, the same men who looked at her and saw either a stepping stone or a trophy. She had heard every variation of, "You're so impressive for your age," and "Your father must be so proud," until the words had lost all meaning. That was when she noticed him. Standing alone by the bar, a black man in a simple charcoal suit held a glass of what appeared to be sparkling water. He wasn't networking. He wasn't scanning the room for opportunities. He was simply standing there, occasionally glancing at his watch, as if counting down the minutes until he could leave. Mason Thompson had worked at Whitmore Industries for 5 years. His performance reviews were consistently excellent. His data analysis reports were cited in board meetings, and yet he had never once applied for a promotion. He arrived at 8, left at 6, and politely declined every after-hours invitation. Most of his colleagues had stopped asking. Tonight, attendance was mandatory. 1 corporate event per year, the memo had said. So here he was, wearing the only suit he owned, trying to make himself invisible among the million-dollar watches and designer labels. Kara found herself walking toward him before she had consciously decided to move. "You're the only person here who isn't trying to sell me something," she said, taking the space beside him at the bar. Mason looked at her, his expression polite but guarded. "Ms. Whitmore?" "Kara." She smiled the kind of smile that usually made men stumble over their words. "And you are?" "Mason Thompson, Data Analysis." She waited for more. A compliment about her leadership, perhaps, or a comment about the company's recent success. Instead, Mason simply nodded and took another sip of his water. Kara felt something she hadn't experienced in years: genuine curiosity. Here was a man who didn't seem impressed by her title, her wealth, or her carefully cultivated image. He wasn't rude, but he wasn't eager either. He was simply present as if she were just another person at a crowded party. "You don't drink?" she asked, gesturing to his glass. "Not tonight." "Hot date after this." The question was meant to be playful, flirtatious even. But Mason's response was measured and calm. "I have someone waiting for me." Kara felt a small spark of challenge ignite in her chest. Someone waiting. A girlfriend, probably. Maybe even a wife. She glanced at his left hand and found no ring, but that didn't mean anything these days. She leaned closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, and let her voice drop to something softer, more intimate. "My age isn't a problem, right?" It was a bold question laced with assumption. She expected him to stammer, to reassure her, to fall into the familiar dance of flattery. Instead, Mason looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Your age has nothing to do with anything, Ms. Whitmore." The words were polite, but they landed like a door closing. Before Kara could respond, Mason set down his glass. "I should go. Someone's waiting." He nodded courteously and walked toward the elevator, leaving Kara standing alone at the bar with her champagne and her confusion. A hand touched her elbow. Diana Cole, her executive assistant and the only person in the company who dared to speak to her honestly, appeared at her side. "Who was that?" Diana asked, watching him go. "Mason Thompson, data analysis." Kara's eyes followed him until the elevator doors closed. "Find out everything about him." Diana raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. She had worked with Kara long enough to recognize that tone. Across the city, Mason unlocked the door to a modest two-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. The living room was small but warm, decorated with mismatched furniture and covered in children's artwork. Crayon drawings of rainbows, stick figure families, and purple elephants hung on every available surface. His mother-in-law Ruth was dozing on the couch with a book open on her lap. She stirred when he entered. "She tried to wait up for you," Ruth whispered, gesturing toward the smaller bedroom. "But she fell asleep around 8:30. Mason thanked her quietly and walked to his daughter's room. Lily was curled up under a blanket covered in cartoon butterflies, her small hand clutching a piece of paper. He gently took it from her fingers and felt his heart tighten. It was a drawing of 3 figures: a tall man with brown skin, a little girl with pigtails, and above them both a woman with wings floating in the clouds. At the bottom, in wobbly 6-year-old handwriting, were the words, "Mommy is watching us." Mason sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to wake her. He traced the outline of the angel with his finger, remembering the real woman behind the crayon strokes. Aisha, his wife, his best friend. Gone 3 years now, taken by cancer that had spread too fast and too far before anyone could stop it. He had held her hand in the hospital room on the last night, and she had made him promise one thing. "Come home to her every night, Mason. No matter what. She needs to know her daddy will always be there." He had kept that promise every single day since. No overtime, no business trips, no promotions that would demand more of his time. His colleagues thought he lacked ambition. His supervisors thought he was wasting his potential. But none of them knew about the little girl who waited by the window every evening, counting the minutes until her father walked through the door. Mason leaned down and kissed Lily's forehead. She stirred slightly, mumbling something about butterflies, then settled back into sleep. He walked to the small desk in the corner of the living room, where a framed photograph sat beside his laptop. Aisha smiled at him from their wedding day, her eyes bright with a future that would never come. "I kept my promise today, too," he whispered to the photograph. Then he sat down and began reviewing the work emails he had ignored at the party. There was one from HR about a new promotion opportunity. He deleted it without reading. Back in her penthouse apartment, Kara stood by the window, staring out at the city lights. The party had ended an hour ago, but she couldn't sleep. Her mind kept returning to the man at the bar. The way he had looked at her without wanting anything. The way he had said, "Your age has nothing to do with anything," as if her youth, her status, her wealth were completely irrelevant. Who was the person waiting for him? A girlfriend? A wife? And why did Kara care so much? She picked up her phone and typed a message to Diana. "That information on Mason Thompson, I want it on my desk by morning." Then she set the phone down and poured herself a glass of wine, watching the city sparkle beneath her. For the first time in years, Kara Whitmore had encountered something she couldn't immediately have, and she had no idea what to do about it. The file appeared on Kara's desk Monday morning, exactly as she had requested. Diana had been thorough. Mason Thompson, 38 years old. Hired 5 years ago as a junior data analyst, promoted once to mid-level and then nothing. His performance reviews were exceptional. His supervisors consistently noted his analytical skills, his attention to detail, his reliability. They also noted with varying degrees of frustration his refusal to consider advancement. He turns down every opportunity, one review stated. Declines travel, won't work past 6. Potential wasted. Kara read the file twice, searching for something that would explain the man she had met at the party. But the words on the page told her nothing about why he had looked at her without wanting anything, or why the phrase, "someone waiting," had stayed in her mind for 3 days. She called Diana into her office. "This is all you found." Diana stood with her hands clasped in front of her, her expression carefully neutral. "That's everything in his personnel file. There's nothing personal. No social media, no emergency contacts. His emergency contact is listed as Ruth Johnson, his mother-in-law." Kara looked up sharply. "Mother-in-law, he's married." Diana hesitated, and in that hesitation, Kara saw something she rarely witnessed in her assistant reluctance. "He was married. His wife passed away 3 years ago." The words landed like stones in still water. Kara sat back in her chair, processing. A widower. That explained the lack of a wedding ring, but it raised more questions than it answered. "What else do you know?" Diana met her eyes directly. "I know that he leaves at 6 every day because he has a daughter. I know that he's never missed a single school event. And I know that whatever you're thinking, Kara, this isn't a man who's playing hard to get. He's not a challenge. He's not a conquest." It was rare for Diana to use her first name. Rarer still for her to speak with such directness. Kara felt a flash of irritation, followed by something uncomfortably close to shame. "I'm not trying to conquer anyone," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Diana didn't respond. She simply placed the file on the desk and left the office, closing the door quietly behind her. Kara stared at the closed door for a long moment. Then she picked up the file and read it again, searching for answers she knew weren't there. On Wednesday, she found herself walking through the data analysis department. It wasn't unusual for her to tour the building. She made a point of being visible, of knowing her employees by name. But this time, her path had a specific destination. Mason was at his desk, studying a spreadsheet on his monitor. He wore a blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and his brow was furrowed in concentration. When Kara approached, he looked up with the same polite, guarded expression she remembered from the party. "Ms. Whitmore." "Kara," she corrected, just as she had before. "I was reviewing the quarterly reports, and I wanted to tell you personally that your analysis of the Henderson account was exceptional." "Thank you." She waited for more. A smile, perhaps. An expression of gratitude for the CEO's personal attention. Instead, Mason simply nodded and turned back to his screen. "You know," Kara continued, refusing to be dismissed so easily, "with your skills, you should be running this department. I've looked at your file. You've turned down 3 promotions in 5 years. The position I have suits me. Suits you." Kara leaned against the edge of a nearby desk, crossing her arms. "Or are you just afraid of what might happen if you actually reached for something more?" For the first time, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger exactly, something closer to weariness, as if he had heard this argument many times before and was tired of explaining himself. "I'm not afraid of failure, Ms. Whitmore." His voice was calm, steady. "I know exactly what I'm capable of. I also know what matters more." "And what's that?" Mason looked at her, then really looked at her, and Kara felt her breath catch in her throat. There was no hostility in his gaze, no judgment. Just a quiet certainty that she found both infuriating and magnetic. "Being where I need to be," he said simply. "When I need to be there." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his entire demeanor shifted. The guardedness melted away, replaced by something soft and warm. "Excuse me," he said. "I need to take this." Kara watched as he stepped away, his voice dropping to a gentle murmur. She couldn't hear the words, but she could hear the tone. Tender, patient, full of love. She walked away. Before he finished the call, her heart beating faster than it should have been. 10 days after the gala, Kara attended a charity event at Riverside Elementary School. Whitmore Industries had sponsored their arts program, and she had agreed to present the awards for the student art competition. It was good publicity, and Kara believed in supporting education. She had no idea that the event would change everything. The gymnasium was decorated with streamers and children's artwork. Parents filled the folding chairs, cameras ready, while students fidgeted nervously in the front rows. Kara stood near the stage, reviewing her brief remarks, when movement near the entrance caught her attention. Mason walked in, still wearing his work clothes. A little girl with braided pigtails broke away from the group of students and ran toward him, her face lit up with pure joy. "Daddy, you came." Mason knelt down to catch her, lifting her into his arms, with a smile that Kara had never seen before. It transformed his entire face, erasing the careful reserve, revealing a warmth that made her chest ache. "Of course I came, baby girl. I wouldn't miss it." The girl held up a piece of paper, bouncing with excitement. I won, 2nd place. Look!" Mason examined the drawing with exaggerated seriousness. "This is beautiful, Lily. I'm so proud of you." Kara couldn't move. She stood frozen by the stage, watching as Mason carried his daughter back to their seats, listening as she chattered about her painting and her friends and the cupcakes they were going to have after the ceremony. The love between them was so visible, so tangible, that it felt almost painful to witness. A woman appeared at Kara's side. Mrs. Patterson, the principal, followed her gaze toward Mason and Lily. "That's Mason Thompson," Mrs. Patterson said. "He's never missed a single event. Not one parent-teacher conference, not one school play, not one awards ceremony. Since his wife passed, he's been everything to that little girl. Father and mother, both." Kara's throat tightened. "His wife? Aisha. She was a wonderful woman. Fought cancer for 2 years before it took her. Mason was with her every step of the way." Mrs. Patterson shook her head sadly. "That man loved her more than anything in this world. Still does, if you ask me." The ceremony began, but Kara barely heard the speeches or the applause. Her eyes kept drifting to Mason and Lily in the 3rd row. The way he leaned down to whisper something in her ear, the way she giggled and buried her face in his shoulder, the way he held her hand when her name was called, walking her to the stage with quiet pride. Kara presented the awards, mechanically smiling for the cameras, saying all the right things. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying every interaction she'd had with Mason Thompson and seeing them in an entirely new light. He wasn't guarded because he was intimidated by her. He wasn't distant because he was playing games. He was simply a man who had built his entire life around a promise to a woman who was no longer there and a child who needed him to come home every night. And Kara, with all her wealth and power, had absolutely nothing to offer that could compare. That night she sat alone in her office long after everyone else had gone home. The city lights sparkled outside her window, but she barely noticed them. Diana found her there at 9 o'clock, still staring at nothing. "You're still here?" Diana said, surprised. "I thought you'd left hours ago." "He was at the school." Kara's voice was flat distant. "With his daughter, Lily. She's 6 years old, and she drew a picture that won 2nd place, and he looked at her like she was the most important thing in the universe." Diana sat down in the chair across from the desk. She didn't speak, just waited. "His wife died of cancer 3 years ago. He's been raising that little girl alone ever since." Kara finally looked at her assistant. You knew all of this, and you didn't tell me. It wasn't my story to tell, but you let me make a fool of myself. You let me think he was just some shy employee who needed encouragement." Diana's expression softened, but her words remained firm. "Kara, you didn't ask about him because you wanted to help him. You asked because he didn't fall at your feet like everyone else. You wanted to figure out his weakness. You wanted to win. The truth of it hit Kara like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to argue to defend herself, but no words came. Because Diana was right. From the very beginning, she had treated Mason like a puzzle to solve a challenge to overcome. She had never once considered that his distance might have nothing to do with her at all. "He's not a mountain for you to climb," Diana continued gently. "He's just a man who's trying to keep a promise to someone he loved, and that little girl is counting on him to keep it." Kara pressed her fingers to her temples, feeling suddenly exhausted. "What am I doing, Diana? What am I even doing?" Diana stood and walked to the door. Before she left, she turned back with an expression that was equal parts sympathy and challenge. "That's the first honest question you've asked yourself in years. Maybe you should sit with it for a while." 4 days later, on Friday evening, another corporate gathering took place. A smaller event this time, just drinks in the executive lounge for department heads and senior staff. Mason was there, required by his supervisor to attend standing near the window with his usual glass of sparkling water. Kara watched him from across the room, gathering her courage. When she finally approached, she didn't bother with flirtation or clever remarks. She simply stood beside him and spoke honestly for the first time. "I know about Aisha," she said quietly. "About Lily. About why you leave at 6 every day." She turned to face him and her voice trembled slightly. "I don't know what to say, Mason. I feel like I've been making assumptions about you that were completely wrong." Mason studied her for a long moment. The wariness in his eyes hadn't disappeared, but something else was there too. A kind of tired acceptance. "You don't need to say anything, Ms. Whitmore. That's my life. It's not your problem." "Kara." She swallowed hard. "Please, just Kara. And I want to understand. Why do you keep everyone at such a distance? Why won't you let anyone in?" He turned toward the window, looking out at the city lights. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured, as if he were choosing each word with care. "You think I keep my distance because I'm afraid. But that's not it. I keep my distance because I already gave my heart to someone. I gave it completely without reservation. And when she left, she took it with her." He glanced at Kara, and she saw the depth of grief that still lived behind his calm exterior. "What I have left I give to my daughter. That's all I have. That's all I can offer." Kara's chest tightened. She had prepared for rejection based on their different worlds, status, money, race. She had not prepared for this, a love so profound that it left no room for anyone else. "So my age," she whispered, "my position, my money, none of that matters." Mason shook his head slowly. "Your age was never the problem, Ms. Whitmore, but I made a promise to Aisha. I promised her that every single night I would come home to our daughter. That promise doesn't have room for anyone else. Not now. Maybe not ever." He set down his glass on a nearby table and straightened his jacket. "I should go. Lily's waiting." He nodded politely, the same courteous gesture he had given her at the first party, and walked toward the elevator. Kara stood frozen, watching him leave champagne untouched in her hand. The party continued around her, laughter and music and the clink of expensive glasses. But Kara Whitmore had never felt so completely alone. She had spent her entire adult life believing that success meant getting what you wanted, that power meant removing obstacles, that determination could overcome any barrier. But standing there in that crowded room, she finally understood the truth. Some things couldn't be bought. Some people couldn't be won. And some loves were so deep that they left no space for anything else. Mason Thompson wasn't refusing her because she wasn't enough. He was refusing her because someone else had been everything. And for the first time in her life, Kara didn't know what to do with that knowledge. The weekend passed slowly. Kara spent most of it in her penthouse, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Manhattan. The same view that had always made her feel powerful now seemed empty. She had built an empire, climbed to the top of a tower that bore her family's name, and yet she couldn't remember the last time someone had waited for her to come home. She thought about Mason kneeling down to catch Lily in the school gymnasium, the way his face had transformed when he saw his daughter running toward him. Kara had dated powerful men, successful men, men who looked impressive on magazine covers, but none of them had ever looked at anyone the way Mason looked at that little girl. Her phone rang on Sunday evening. Diana's name appeared on the screen. "Are you okay?" Diana asked. "You've been quiet all weekend." Kara watched the city lights flicker below. "He didn't reject me because I'm lacking something. He rejected me because he already has everything he needs." Her voice cracked slightly. "And I have everything, Diana, everything anyone could want, but nothing that actually matters." Diana was quiet for a moment. "So what are you going to do about it?" Kara didn't have an answer. Not yet. Monday morning brought a board meeting. The quarterly review included a proposal from the operations director to restructure the data analysis department. Among the suggested cuts were employees who, in his words, failed to demonstrate commitment through participation in company events and advancement opportunities. Kara recognized the criteria immediately. It was aimed at people like Mason, people who did their jobs well but refused to sacrifice their personal lives for corporate ambition. "This proposal is rejected," she said, her voice cutting through the room. The operations director looked startled. "Ms. Whitmore, the metrics clearly show that these employees are not maximizing their potential contribution to the company." "Their potential contribution?" Kara leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Mason Thompson's analysis of the Henderson account saved this company $3 million last quarter. His work is cited in every major report that crosses my desk. The fact that he leaves at 6 o'clock doesn't diminish his value. It means he has his priorities straight." The room fell silent. Board members exchanged uncertain glances, unaccustomed to hearing their CEO defend a mid-level employee by name. "We will not penalize people for having lives outside this building," Kara continued. "In fact, I want HR to draft a new policy. Flexible scheduling for employees with young children. Remote work options where feasible. We've been measuring commitment by hours spent in the office. That ends now." The meeting moved on to other topics, but Kara's mind stayed with the decision she had just made. It wasn't about Mason. Or rather, it wasn't only about Mason. It was about the realization that she had spent her entire career valuing the wrong things. 2 weeks later, Kara established an anonymous scholarship fund for children of single-parent employees. She worked with the elementary school's principal, Mrs. Patterson, to identify recipients. When the list came back, one name stood out: Lily Thompson. Diana brought the paperwork to Kara's office for final approval. "You know he'll never find out this came from you," Diana said. Kara signed the documents without hesitation. "That's the point." "Is it?" Diana studied her carefully. "You could tell him. Show him what you've done. Maybe he'd see you differently." Kara shook her head. "I'm not doing this to change how he sees me. I'm doing this because for the first time in my life I understand something." She set down her pen and met Diana's eyes. "Real success isn't measured by what you have. It's measured by what you're willing to give without expecting anything in return." Diana smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through her usual professional reserve. "You've changed." "Maybe." Kara looked out the window at the city below. "Or maybe I'm just finally seeing things clearly." On a Friday evening, 3 weeks after their last conversation, 2 scenes unfolded simultaneously across the city. In a modest Brooklyn apartment, Mason Thompson sat at the small kitchen table while Lily bounced excitedly in her chair. She held a letter that had arrived from her school, reading the words for the 3rd time, even though she had already memorized them. "Daddy, it says I got a scholarship. A real scholarship. Ms. Patterson said I can take art classes at the community center now." Mason took the letter and read it himself, his throat tightening. Anonymous donor. full coverage for art supplies and instruction. He thought about the promotion he had turned down, the overtime he had refused, the opportunities he had let pass by. And yet somehow his daughter was going to get the chance she deserved. "That's amazing, baby girl." He pulled Lily into his arms, holding her tight. "I'm so proud of you. Does this mean I can be a real artist? Like Mommy wanted—" Mason looked up at the photograph on the bookshelf. Aisha smiled back at him, frozen forever on their wedding day. "You see that?" he whispered to the photograph. "She's going to be an artist." Lily followed his gaze and grew quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question she asked every few weeks, the one that always broke his heart a little. "Daddy, does Mommy see us?" Mason kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Always, sweetheart. Always." Across the river, Kara Whitmore stepped out of the elevator on the ground floor of Whitmore Industries. The clock on the wall read 7 o'clock. The office was nearly empty, most employees long gone to their families and their lives outside these walls. She walked through the lobby slowly, her heels echoing on the marble floor. For years, she had been the last one to leave, wearing her dedication like a badge of honor. Tonight was the first time she had left while the sun was still setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. There was no one waiting for her at home, no child running to greet her at the door, no photograph of a lost love watching over her evening routine. But as Kara stepped out onto the sidewalk and felt the cool evening air on her face, she realized something had shifted inside her. She had spent her whole life believing that winning meant getting what she wanted. That power meant removing obstacles. That success meant standing at the top above everyone else. But Mason Thompson had shown her a different kind of strength. The strength to say no to advancement because something mattered more. The strength to keep a promise even when the person you made it to was gone. The strength to build a small, quiet life and fill it with so much love that there was no room for anything else. Kara smiled as she walked toward her waiting car. Not the confident smile of a CEO who had closed another deal. Something softer, something more human. She had been wrong from the very beginning. She had thought age status and money were the barriers between them. But the real barrier was something that couldn't be bought or negotiated or overcome through sheer determination. Devotion. Pure, unshakable devotion to the people who mattered most. As her driver pulled into traffic, Kara looked back at the tower that bore her family's name. Somewhere in Brooklyn, a little girl was showing her father a scholarship letter. Somewhere in that modest apartment, a man was keeping a promise to a woman he would love for the rest of his life. And Kara finally understood the truth that had eluded her for 32 years. My age was never the problem. His devotion was. And that's where our story ends. Not with a kiss. Not with a grand romantic gesture. But with something far more powerful, a woman who finally understood that the greatest love isn't about possession. It's about devotion. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments. What would you have done in Kara's place? And don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories like this one. I'll see you in the next video.